Good morning, Zeke, and thank you very much for joining us.
Kia ora, thank you for having me along.
So, with Centre for Social Impact's 10th anniversary, we decided that we would talk to 10 people who are having a social impact, and of course, your name came up. And I wanted to start asking you about your social impact journey by asking about your very early years before you even went out into the big world of primary school, about your family and the people who shaped you.
I think that's a fantastic place to start because I would say that it takes a village to raise a child, and I'm a product of a village of an amazing whānau. My parents and my siblings, albeit annoying at times, are included in that village, as well as my aunties, my uncles, amazing mentors. I was born in Rotorua. I was about 5 or 6. I grew up for about 5 or 6 years in Tū Kotahi, alongside my dad's whānau. My dad hails from the Cook Islands, from the beautiful island of Aitutaki. And so I was about 5 or 6 when we made our way north from Tū Kotahi. We found ourselves in Tāmakimakaudo, and I would say it was there that I really found who I was. And what I mean by that is I think, the privilege of saying that I come from humble beginnings. My whānau didn't have much. My parents, bless them, they worked their hardest. And my dad was kind of a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Never went to university, decided to provide and found any job that he could to do that for me and my younger siblings. And mum, dedicated to us and our development, decided to stay home and did her best to support us. It did mean that I have grown up in, or actually reflecting on it now, I see it. But as a young person growing up, I grew up homeless for about 2 or 3 years in Tāmakimakaudo. I've lived everywhere from the couch or the lounge of aunties and uncles or family friends, through to all being crammed into a car on the streets, parked up in just outside homes of family friends and whatnot. But if you ask me, I never realized that that's what it meant to be homeless because of the environment that my whānau brought us up in. So it was for me a great experience and a real telling time. I think they instilled those values in me from a young age, the importance of working hard, of believing in myself and my whānau, my siblings, and supporting each other along that journey.
So your parents were holding the quality of your life together, even when things were really difficult financially.
Absolutely. And as a young person, I was none the wiser. Again, only reflecting on it now, do I realize the situation or the reality of how I grew up was. But mum and dad really did their best to create a world where we felt like this was exactly how everyone else grew up. We didn't feel like we were going without. We felt like we weren't missing out on anything. And there were some times, I think some times as a young person, where we thought, oh, our friends went off here for a holiday, or everyone had the newest gear, uniform, clothes, shoes, whatnot for every school term or for the new year, and we didn't. But I think mum and dad did a really good job of making things work.
And what was it like when you were outside of the family in an environment like, as you say, you see other kids with different things. So you're in that school environment. What were you seeing in that world?
I think it was a mix. And I say that because I had the privilege of growing up, of coming through Kohanga Reo. So in full immersion, Te Reo Māori, through my earlier years, and then in the earlier stages, kind of that primary into intermediate space, through kura kaupapa Māori. So it was a real mix of young people of my peers who were in a similar situation as I was, right through to those who maybe had a little bit more than us financially. But what I realize now, in reflection of those times, is that I don't think I'd change it. If I could go back in time and support my parents to support me, a younger me, or whatever that was, I don't think I'd change it, because I know that a lot of my peers who had more than us financially didn't have probably as much time with their parents as we did, or didn't have the ability to just sit down as a whānau at a table constantly, every night and every morning, to share experiences, to learn from each other, to complain, cry. And I think the things that make a home for us, for me and my siblings. So it was definitely a mix. And it wasn't until I started going into more mainstream schooling, into secondary school, that I actually realized the difference in how I grew up to some of my peers.
So what did you observe at secondary school? What were the things that really struck you about the differences between your life and the life of some of your other peers?
I think probably the major difference was the financial sustainability and the home or stability for some of the peers, and that's not a criticism of them. It's not saying or a criticism, I think, of my parents. It was more that I didn't realize that it was, it was normal for some people to go to school and have everything they absolutely need, from full packed lunches, kind of afternoon tea, morning tea, right through to brand new school uniforms, and then be able to go on every school trip. And participate in every school activity, extracurricular activity that cost money. It wasn't a normal thing for me, and it was actually quite inspiring, if I do say so, when I moved into that secondary school space, and I actually realized that this is a possibility, that some way, shape, or form, this could be a future that I can be a part of, one. And two, if I look at it, how I think about it today, something that I hope to create for my children when I have them in the future.
And you went to Taipa area school?
Correct.
So by this stage that's in the north?
It is. We spent about 2 or 3 years here in Tamaki Makaurau, alongside our wider whānau, alongside my aunties and uncles and family friends. But actually moving out of Tū if I take a step back, the reason we moved out of Tū in the first place, out of Waikato there, moved up to Tamaki, Tamaki was always kind of a stepping stone. We were making our way to the far north. And the reason being was my karaua, my grandfather at the time, he got sick in Tū and wanted to go home. Which for all of my whānau, all of my whakapapa Māori whānau, so all of my whānau on my mum's side, is the far north. So we eventually left Auckland. We made our way to the far north. I had the privilege of growing up on a farm, living in a bus at that time. It was probably what I would say my fanciest home kind of growing up, was this old broken down bus. And I didn't realize this, I laugh at it now, but the bus that we lived in, Dad had converted into a home. It had a chimney. It was that old of a bus that it had a chimney in it. And that was our home for about a year. But we eventually settled in the far north, where my whānau are today, and made a home up there. And that's how I ended up at Taipa Area School.
And at Taipa, you ended up as head boy, and you founded the Leadership Academy and the Peer Support Group. Obviously, you were motoring by this stage.
I think, and honestly, that's what I reflect on the importance of the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Because I've reflected on all of the times that I'm growing up, and I think the hardship that I didn't realize was hardship until I reflect on it now, was that every time I came home, every time I was going to school, or every weekend, even though we wouldn't go to really nice places or places that cost money, it wasn't until probably my teens or late teens that I started going to McDonald's or the movies more often. What was a kind of an annual treat became more common because we were working or picking up odd jobs here and there. My whānau, both my parents and my immediate aunties and uncles around me, and my cousins, were really good at instilling work ethic. Again, that self-belief piece. So by the time I got to Taipa, I think I was in a good space mentally in terms of who I wanted to be. And I had this audacious dream growing up, and I don't even know where it was from, because from probably zero, knowing my nerdy self, right through to about 12, I wanted to be a paleontologist. I love Jurassic Park. I love everything dinosaurs. So I was just school didn't really matter to me. I was going to go and dig up bones all around the world. And then at about 11 or 12, for some reason, I got it into my head that I wanted to be the first Māori Prime Minister elected for Aotearoa here in New Zealand. And I think it was about that time too that I started moving or transitioning into Taipa Area School. And I would say that probably a catalytic event for that was one day I got off the school bus and I walked into class, and I remember it as if it was yesterday. I walked into class, we had form time, so about 10 minutes before our classes started, and two boys from my class, who I now consider my brothers, they weren't there, and they walked in just at the end of form time, and I remember asking them why they were late, just out of curiosity. I didn't know them that well at the time, but I remember asking them why they were late. to form time, and they looked at me with a cheeky Māori smile, as Māori boys do, and they said, oh, "You know why, bro?" And I was like, honestly, I have no idea. And what they said to me on that day stuck with me too today, and the reason why I do what I do. And they said, because that's form time's the easiest time to sell drugs and alcohol at school. And I asked them why. Why was that the case? Why did you do that? In my mind, this, I guess, innocent young person growing up at the time with the family that I had, that was just a big no-no. Drugs were super bad. Alcohol was the worst thing on earth. And I remember asking them why. Their answer stuck with me, and why I continue to do what I do. And we'll probably talk about this a little later on too, as to why I aspire to roles like this one, is because they turned around to me, they looked me dead in the eye and said, because that's what it means to be Māori. That was their aspiration, or at the time, that's what they believed to be normal, to be who we were, which completely conflicted with the way that I was raised, with the ideologies, I guess, that I was exposed to, in terms of the world as our oyster. We can work for it, and we can create a future that we want. And I think that event is what led to the Leadership Academy piece, is what led to the Head Boy piece, and everything else that I've been privileged to be a part of, was this idea that that's not who we are. We are far more than that, whether it's because we're from the region, from the regions, and from low socioeconomic communities, whether it's because we're Māori, because we're Pacifica, because some of our whānau immigrant whānau, regardless of any of those circumstances, that doesn't mean that's who we have to be. So that was a big turning point for me, and I think why Taipa stands out so much as an important part of my journey.
So, was it difficult to engage your peers at Taipa in thinking about the world differently through the sort of peer support and leadership academy?
If I reflect on it now, yes. At the time, no. And I think that's because I had far more energy back then than I do now. The greys are well and truly shining through. But at the time, I think the beauty of it is we had some really good teachers. And what I say by that is, all of our teachers taught us the subjects that they were, I guess, hired to teach us. But we had a handful. Well, actually, that's not fair to say. I think it's prominent in small rural regional schools to have a really good set of teachers. Unfortunately, I think they're really under-resourced in some places. But we had a really good set of teachers who believed in us. I think instead of teaching us, they believed in us. And as a result of that, to answer your question, was it hard to change the thinking? The reason I say no is because the teachers were behind me and behind my peers as we undertook this journey. And what I mean by that is, they weren't necessarily reinforcing you can be anything, the world is your oyster. It wasn't necessarily that messaging that was complementary to what we were doing, but they would put on lunch for us, for example. And to this day, I do not underestimate the power of food to bring people together from a range of backgrounds, from a range of beliefs, whatever that is. Because I know that for two of who I now consider my brothers, like I said, they were at the time aspiring gang members. And I mean aspiring gang members. They knew that that's all there was nothing else outside of becoming a gang member by the time they'd finished school, if not sooner, for them. And so it's those two and my best mate at the time, who I'd met in Kura Kaupapa, in the Kura Kaupapa, in the local Kura Kaupapa, during intermediate. It was the four of us. But what brought us together was a free feed. It was very uncommon for me to get fish and chips at school, to have bread and tomato sauce and all of these things that I thought were fancy. And I know that was the exact same for my best mates as well. So the fact that our teachers would do some things that were kind of outside of the scope of their mahi, they'd go above and beyond, made, I think, engaging my peers to think differently a lot easier than it would have been if it was just me. Because I remember the first lunch we had, our teacher, we say lured, but he did an amazing job. He conned us into to coming back at lunchtime. And for the four of us, we weren't the most studious of pupils. We didn't love academia. We were your typical kind of, let's go to PE period. That's great. Let's do sciences because we might be able to blow some stuff up. English, let's try and go and do something else, Māori performing arts or whatever that is. But our teacher got us back in because he said he shouted us lunch. What I didn't realize he was going to do as well in that same lunch was he taught us how to play chess. And I think that became probably the first time we pushed the boundaries of what we believed was possible. And as a result of that, this conversation about changing our mindset, about believing in ourselves and aspiring to be more, was kind of a build on from that first lunch.
It's really interesting because when I've talked to people about leadership through this series and in the past, there's often the one or two people who are sort of outside of their immediate sort of family or whatever, who make kids feel seen, make them feel recognized as entities in the world. And it sounds as though that teacher was one of those people for you.
100%, 100%. Even today, you know, I looked on it. My parents gave me what I needed. My aunties and uncles gave me what I wanted, which was at certain times not the greatest thing. They'd just spoil me, and then I'd kind of get away with things. And then as I looked to the village, right, that wider ecosystem, key teachers, principals, people who believed in us, mentors, coaches, for various things, they played key roles in giving us tools that we didn't even know we needed. That was probably outside of, now that I reflect on it, probably outside of the scope of what my parents knew we needed. And I think that was the beauty of the village that I grew up in.
So moving on from school, what did you want to shape for your future? You chose to go to university, study business?
I did. Yes, I did indeed. And again, you know, the head boy piece, I was a student rep on the board, and the reason I reflect back on that for school is all of those things. And then choosing to go to university, I studied business at that time too, and that transition, or that period between school and university, I had started working with some charities and doing some charitable work around mental health and suicide prevention, as well as health in general, and accessibility to health tools for people in the regions. All of those things, to me, are anchored in that initial conversation I had with my now best mates, my brothers, the idea of just showcasing what is possible. Because I know for me, like, I was the first in my whānau to attend university on both sides, both from my dad and my mum's side of the whānau, first to go to university. And as a result of that, first to complete my degree and graduate with a degree. And now all of my siblings have gone, or will go, or are beginning to go to university. And I think that's what's important to me, is wherever I've seen my siblings, my cousins, my peers say, oh, we can't do that because we're Māori, or because we're PI, because we're Pasifika, or whatever the reason is kind of a motivation for me to go, okay, I'll give it a go. I will give it a go. Give you an example, hopefully a good one, and you can just follow through and make it your own.
So tell me about Tū Kotahi.
Yes. So Tū Kotahi was actually, it started in school. It started at Taipa Area School, which is, I'm a big fan. I'm a proud old boy for Taipa Area School as a result of all of these things. So Tū Kotahi was this idea at the beginning. We were year 12, year 13. I think this was about 2011, 2012, where Northland, unfortunately at the time, suffered a spate of mental illness, and as a result of youth suicide in the region. And when you're from a small community, you know that the ripple effects that anything that happens in the community sends to everyone. A good friend of mine at the time, and I at the time, realized that our peers, we were talking to each other more than we were talking to the support services available, then we were talking to our parents to an extreme extent, which is a really dangerous place for young people to be, who are still learning to be young people, who are still building these filters, these understandings, right, these perceptions of right or wrong, and everything that comes with that. And so the idea behind Tū Kotahi was that we needed to get our peers to support sooner rather than later. So it was taking the burden off those who were being the shoulder, I guess, to cry on, one, and two, supporting those young people who needed the support in the first place. So we came together, and on a page and a half, we designed the idea for Tū Kotahi, which was a peer-to-peer support program that we could digitize, that we could create into an app that puts all of the tools to support a young person into cellular devices, into an app that all of our young people could access at our school. It just so happened that around the same time, Mike King had travelled up to the school that we were going to Taipa Area School. We were the very first school that he talked to before he began I Am Hope, the Key Life Charitable Trust. Taipa was the first school that he came to. And it was that day that my friend and I decided, hey, if we can get his attention in some way, shape, or form, if we can talk to him about this idea, he might be able to help us bring that to life. Infamously, so my way of getting attention from him was, everyone was, he's a great comedian. And I know recently there have been differing views around his approach. For us at the time, for a community in the need, it was an advocate that we needed. And so the one thing that I thought, oh, this is definitely going to get his attention, was I stood up at the end of his presentation, and I remember telling him, well, jokes are all good and well, but they don't change how and what impacts us here as young people. And if you really want to make a difference, we need to see you more than once, because everyone comes to our community. The cameras and the lights come when it's trending, when the news is here, and then everyone leaves when they go. And I don't know what possessed me to say something along that lines, if not exactly that. But as a result of that, we ended up working together to build Tū Kotahi and what is now I Am Hope.
So you've now taken this role as head of the One New Zealand Foundation.
Yes.
Tell me about their work. So there's a strong focus on Southland. Tell me about that.
Correct. So and I love the place-based initiative. This was actually an initiative that began in, I believe, 2020, or just as we were navigating the lockdown, the COVID lockdowns and whatnot. My predecessor, Lani Evans, who held the space, I believe she took the role, and she was my predecessor from 2017 to about 2022-ish. And there were a couple of interims holding the space in between. But Lani came up with this brilliant idea that instead of us spreading our funds nationally, because we are a small fund, we are a large corporate philanthropic in terms of the funding that we grant every year across Aotearoa. But in terms of the greater scheme of things, in terms of philanthropy as a whole, we've got quite a smaller fund in comparison to others. And it was this idea of being really intentional, being really impactful with our work. And she began to formulate the idea of doing a place-based initiative, which was quite different for us for a corporate foundation to really zone in on one particular geographic location. And through the work that she was doing at the time in the development of the Ohi Data Navigator and the analysis that her and the team undertook, they identified Invercargill or Southland as a key core region in need of philanthropic investment for the development of young people. And so now today we continue that work with through the Invercargill initiative. So I believe we're in year 3 or year 4 of a 5-year place-based initiative. And for us, it's amazing, because it means we're adding value, I guess, to what some would consider an investment in my space, or a social investment in my space. We're more than just the money that we grant and that we bring. In actual fact, that the reason, or the fact that we've been able to stay in a region for more than a year, or a commitment for over multiple years, has meant that we can leverage partnerships with other funders in the local area. It means that we can leverage our national and at times international partnerships and expose our young people in the Invercargill initiative to a range of amazing entities. Example, the Warriors probably just being the easiest to mention from our end, with our corporate being the name sponsor for the One NZ Warriors, bringing sports academies to Tāmaki Makaurau, or doing our best to get representatives down into Southland to speak to one very small part of what is a larger work program.
So what was the unique pressing needs in the Southland community that led to that focus?
That's a good question. What we know from the data at the time that Lani and the team had collected was that Southland had, at that point in time, one of the largest, or disproportionately large number of disadvantaged and excluded young people, and a significantly lower philanthropic investment into the region than other regions across Aotearoa. Because a lot of people go, oh, if you're going to choose a region, or you're going to do a place-based initiative, why would you not choose Northland? Or why would you not choose the East Coast, or some of the other key regions that I think at the time those were considered. And I know those regions were a part of the deliberation, but a key part of that was understanding that Southland has low philanthropic investment from the philanthropic sector. And so the idea was we could go to one of the other regions, but there is already a lot of philanthropic investment into those regions. And we want to make sure too that the work that we're currently doing is complementary to work at the time that our corporate was doing. And we know One NZ has been building its relationships in Southland, so we could leverage some of their resources as well to add value to our existing pieces of work.
What have you seen in terms of the work that you've found really exciting or inspiring for the young people that you've met?
I think, we could spend all day. I know that our team down in Invercargill, down in Southland there, the Invercargill Initiative, they have worked really hard. And through some changing times here at Te Rourou, with a new head of foundation, with new CE coming in, having worked under Lani and any of the interims people who held space in between us, the team have done an amazing job. And I think probably the core program or project that comes out of the Invercargill Initiative that I just love to hear about is our rangatahi Māori fund, Te Ohaka Tīwhera, which is our youth-led funding panel, where we've got 10 young people from Southland, born and bred in Waihopai and Invercargill and Motukaraka and Bluff, who come together to distribute funding to communities and to projects that they feel are the most significant, are the most important, are going to have the best impact or the most significant impact on their peers and in their community. So we've got a really great group of young people down there who are part of our decision making. And the reason why I love them is part of it reminds me, and this is how I know I'm getting too old in some spaces, part of it reminds me of the things that I would say confidently, even if I didn't quite know, I'd never really experienced, for example, governance. It's the unfiltered, the unconditioned, unbridled, I would say, passion of our young people that shine through in this panel. That's led to significant changes. For example, for us, we're amending our trust deed as we speak. And we're amending our trust deed because our young people identified a group of organizations of social enterprises, which we can't currently fund, as key to sustainable funding or to sustainable investment into the region in the future. As a result of their decision to want to fund them, we now have to change, or we are changing our trust deed to make that decision work. And I think it's when I see that passion shine through, when you hear the confidence in our young people, that kind of thing just, to me, makes it all worth it. All of at times when we're working through whatever we're working through, changes or different strategies, whatever it may be, when we see our young people really stand up and say, this is what matters to us, I think that always keeps me coming back, making sure we're fighting for them, and we can continue to do work like that.
Oh, it's exciting.
It is.
In a world of trouble, as it seems to be at the moment, what's giving you hope for the future of Aotearoa?
I think this is an easy one, and any of my peers and anyone who knows me who's listening to this is going to say, no, this is a cheat answer, that's cheap, think better than that. I can easily say our young people, but I'm going to say our young people, and then I'm going to park that for a little bit as we dive into this. I think what's giving me hope is actually a mix of diving into the things that aren't giving me hope, one, and two is if I'm looking at individuals, if I'm looking at groups, if I'm looking at organizations who are continuing to do amazing things. So I'll get to the first part first. I've noticed, especially joining this role and only being, I guess, a year and a month in as the head of foundation for Te Rourou for the One New Zealand Foundation, one of the key things that have kind of stood out that I am worried about or that I've observed is, to your point, at times it can seem like a pretty hopeless world with changes in major governments, with some of the decisions that we're seeing, with the wars that are happening. One of the things that worries me a lot about that is it seems to be filtering through, it seems to be seeping into, I would say, into leaderships, into those who are working in the charity space, who are those who are working in the philanthropic space. I know that we create safe spaces for our people, for my peers, to be able to share that and unload. But I do feel like it's beginning to make its way into our ethos, into our thinking more than I'd like it to. And what I mean by that is, as leaders in the space, as those who have to hold space and who are responsible for strategy and who are responsible for the future of these organizations, it's a challenge to me, I think, particularly, and to others in leadership roles, is not to give up. Is to not lose hope when all seems lost in different spaces and places. And the easiest one to chat to for that, for example, is the Treaty Principles Bill. Now, I won't dive into that and go, this is right or this is wrong, but I've seen, the lack of social cohesion that's come as a result of that. I'm hearing and seeing frequently as I meet with different charities. It's those conversations have brought the morale for our people down so low that I do think it's a dangerous space to be in as a leader, because sometimes you're right. The difficulty or the burden of these roles is we do have to kind of stop that from getting to our teams. We have to stop, kind of turn down the noise or block it out so that our people can do the amazing amazing work that they're doing, and that doubly so, for the frontline workers, for those who are delivering services in communities every day. So I think in that, for me, is constantly reflecting. So it's being in that space, understanding that out there can be quite daunting, that it is a hard time economically, socially, politically, environmentally. But for me, it's a self-check, a self-reflection every day if I need to be, or at least once or twice a week, going, why is this important? Why do you do what you do? What are the affirmations you need to be able to continue that? Because it's important that we don't allow that thinking or the negativity of that cloud, I think, our judgment. And then what I'm creating, for example, is out of spite of something that's happened, which isn't necessarily addressing what our young people are wanting to, we're almost indirectly conditioning them by going to them and go, oh, did you see this? This is so bad. And I think unknowingly leaving that on our young people and them having to burden that or shoulder that burden moving forward. So that's probably one. And the other part is just seeing amazing people do amazing stuff. I think it can be quite easy in small towns, and at times maybe we don't realize, I might get in trouble from some of my friends for this, sometimes in Aotearoa too, we don't realize that we are quite a small nation in comparison to some of the countries all around the world. We are, some countries consider us an island nation, and that has beautiful, I think, benefits to that. But for me, it's about the importance of just seeing amazing people doing amazing stuff and knowing, not becoming, I think, fighting the tall poppy syndrome that can exist in some spaces and going, that's amazing. And feeding off of that and going, you know what, if that person's had the courage to do X, Y, Z, then I need to find that in myself as well. How can I continue to build on and use that as momentum moving forward? And when I say people, I'm looking at a range of, from those in the political space who are holding space on all ends of the beehive, from all sides of the beehive, right through to those working in corporates, to those working on the front line, and everyone in between.
Kia ora, Zeke. Thank you very much for your time today, and you've given me some things to reflect on about not getting dragged into the negativity and keeping in mind the people who are out there fighting the good fight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.